Thank you so very much for attending this discussion on the housing issue confronts almost all of us. I'm going to go down the panel, introduce each one of them, have them say a couple of sentences about themselves, dive into questions, and then, as you already know, you have an opportunity through Whova to submit questions, which I hope this handy iPad they sent me will enable me to read. In the meantime, I want to acknowledge the sponsorship of this session of LIUNA, our friends. Is there a representative from LIUNA present? Even though there isn't, would you give that person and organization a hand, please, for their generosity? Thank you. With me today is Jane Broom from Microsoft, Faith Pettis from Pacifica Law Group, Nicholas Carr from Governor Bob Ferguson's office, and Amy Villas from Digital. So beginning with Jane, a sentence or two about your job and its nexus to housing, and then we'll just go down the line.
I got it. Hi, everybody. Jane Broom. I'm with Microsoft, and my day job is managing Microsoft's philanthropic work here in the state of Washington, which is education and arts and culture and human service, and most recently, affordable housing. So my connection here is running Microsoft's affordable housing initiative that we launched in 2019.
Hello, everyone. My name is Faith Pettis. I'm a partner at Pacifica Law Group, which is a smallish sized firm in downtown Seattle that does a lot of public work. And I specifically am a public finance lawyer, otherwise known as a bond lawyer, specializing in affordable housing finance. I represent the state agency that issues low-income housing tax credits and bond cap in the state of Washington.
Hello, everyone. My name is Nicholas Carr. I am the Senior Policy Advisor for Governor Bob Ferguson. I focused on housing. So I am tasked with working with both the governor and the lieutenant governor's office and the legislature on crafting a long-term housing strategy for the state of Washington.
Thanks. Amy Villas. I am from Digital, which is when people are like, what does Digital do? It's a good one. And it's all caps too. I'm not sure why. But we are an innovation cluster up in Canada. We are located in British Columbia. I am the Director of Housing Growth Innovation, which is a lot of words too. But I focus sort of in three buckets. One, ecosystem building. So getting folks a little more aware and education folks about what we can do with innovation in housing production. I also co-invest in technologies to move the needle on housing production, which I'm happy to dig into in some of the questions and chats we're going to have, as well as workforce development and adoption knowledge mobilization stuff.
Thank you. Sound check. Did you hear everybody at the back of the room? Okay. Be mindful of holding the mics enough to your mouth, please. Everybody's here because they acknowledge that a housing should exist. I think that's why we're having this discussion. I think that's why you're here. Yes, it absolutely. Thank you for having dropped by, Jane. I want to start off by gauging each of you, your point of view about how big a problem this is. And I'm going to use the famously patented Heck scale from 1 to 10. In this regard, on a scale from 1 to 10, where housing is not much of a problem, really. 1. 5, yes, it is a problem, but we have lots of problems, and this is one of them. And 10 is a big problem and should be our focus of policymakers, top tier meaning top 3. 1 to 10, Jane.
8. 8 to 9.
10.
10. I'm going to go 10. I won't elaborate, but it's a top tier issue. It's within the top 3 in our government policy and direction. And obviously we all are in this room because housing hits some of us, in different ways, but it has been a focus of my career. So it's always going to be a 10.
Nick, why'd you give it a 10?
Because housing is the baseline for thriving and for being successful as a person or a family in the country and the state. And so when you lack stable, predictable housing, everything else is affected from your education, your employment, and so on and so forth. It is also one of the few things, maybe not one of the few things, one of the most important things that we can also offer significant collaboration and connection to other sectors, whether it's an economic sector, whether it's kind of innovative building. It connects to so many other things, both in the economy, but also in the social fabric of our country, that it is completely necessary to ensure that it is affordable and stable. And so it's always going to be a 10, depending on the context of what we're talking about.
In Washington State on the affordability issue, it's interesting to note that 50% of renters and 25% of homeowners spend in excess of the federal standard of 33% of income on shelter as a measure of lack of access to affordability. Faith, you gave it an 8 or 9?
I know, and I would have given it a 10 a couple of years ago. I
Things are so much better.
Yeah, and maybe it's just that it's been with us for so long and the problem seems so intractable, and other problems have also risen as being equally important. And I completely acknowledge Nick's point. It was actually in my notes here, is that housing is the great connector and the great stabilizer. If you have stable housing, it addresses health issues. It can help with climate change. It can help with stronger families who have more time to be together. There's so many things that you can address when you deal with housing. But I'm also really torn about the shortage of funding we have out there. And there are so many different needs that I'm afraid to give it a 10 because of the other urgent needs we have.
Jane, you gave it an 8? You're on the low end of this.
Geez, I think I'm just an
How
optimist.
embarrassing.
I know. Told you I shouldn't be on this panel. No, anyway, actually, I think I have a legit reason why I gave it an 8. All the social imperative things, I completely agree. The one other layer I'd add, speaking on behalf of the employer community, is just from it's an economic imperative right now. It is becoming an issue why people don't want to move to this region. And I think that's something we have to think about, not today or tomorrow, but I think long term, at a time when things are changing so rapidly in the economy and we need the world's best and brightest to come here. And we need our current best and brightest teachers, firefighters, police officers, et cetera, to stay. So I think that's the other reason why I went high. The reason why I kept it at an 8 is I do feel like we're the newcomer into this conversation. We're Microsoft. We make software. That's what we do. And in 2019, this became one of our top issues. But the level of conversation and engagement that I see happening now versus 2019 does give me some hope. There's a lot of really smart leaders thinking about this, thinking about how to apply technology, different things to solve this. And I think the collaboration that's happening across regions and across states and even cross borders is inspiring.
Apropos to your point, Jane, a survey of professional economic development professionals, to be redundant, throughout Washington State a couple of years ago revealed their belief that the number one impediment to quality economic growth was the lack of access to housing in Washington State. Number one impediment to economic growth. I've always believed that one of the great benefits of organizations like Penwar or similar ones is the opportunity to share best practices and ideas. I never, ever have companies where I didn't learn something from you, for which I'm very grateful. In that vein, I want to ask you what you think are one or two of the most promising innovations underscored in increasing housing supply. And I'm stressing the word innovation because what I'm hoping not to hear is anything that basically is more of the same. Oh, we need more permitting reform, or we need more appropriation to the Housing Trust Fund, or whatever the social housing entity in your jurisdiction is. Yes, yes, yes to all of those. Innovation, doing something differently than what we've been doing. Amy, can we start with you?
If you don't mind, I challenge the doing something differently piece. We are still creating housing with hammers and nails. It's fundamental. And sometimes it's about looking at innovation, not so much like we've created a new widget. It's one of my favorite words. I use it all the time. We've created a new widget and it's mind blowing and it's going to be a silver bullet. Like that does not exist. But it's things like housing kits. They've been around since, 1906 or, before that. So we need to look at how we built them back then, why they failed, and then modify them to be successful and look at local regional supply chain for them, look for digital fabrication tools. So things like that. So I would say like a housing kit, you'd be like, yeah, we've been making those for 100+ years, but I think how we approach them needs to be different. Obviously in this space, I'll be the first to say AI, and I can happily unpack that for anyone that wants to know it's applied to the housing sector, but how we're using it to capture and innovate in the space has put the gas pedal down. It's the new electricity. We all know that. And there are some key pieces. And as we talk, I'm sure I'll pull out a couple, but AI for generative design. I'm funding a project that is looking at the use of generative design for planning the Malahat Nation, Vancouver Island. So it's 2,300 acres, and that would take years and years of sets and sets of drawings by architects. These designs can be generated in 5 minutes, and you see different typology based on the land use regulations that apply to that area. So those are big pieces. One huge area that we all need to look at, it's not that sexy, but is supply chain management, looking at ERP systems that are helping us in supply chain. So those are big ones.
ERP.
It's like outsource management software.
Nobody gets to use an acronym without.
Fair. At
Just
least
for those of us who don't
in the health
understand
authority.
that.
The health authority is the worst with acronyms. So yes, I will keep that in mind. AI stands for artificial intelligence, just to correct that one. So those are big ones. There's lots of movement in material things, how we're looking at the use and manufacturing processes with materials. So how offsite manufacturing. So it's about fundamentally the modernization. And, we were talking about it now, and to back up one sec about the crisis of homes, we've been there before. We're really looking at this as we have such a rally cry around it. That we're looking at the industrialization again of housing production, and we've done it during the war years. We can do it again. And I know people are like, oh, great, we're going to have a bunch of ugly boxes. It's not the case. So lots more to unpack, but we've got an hour, don't we?
So I'm going to say exactly the same thing. It's offsite manufacturing of housing, and industrializing that process. Whether colloquially we call it modular, but it's not just a modular box. There's a lot of ways we think about this, from volumetric to panelized, but the streamlining of the actual manufacturing or the production of housing itself to lower costs, and to create more economic opportunity for the areas those manufacturers are located.
What's keeping us from doing that?
Regulation broadly and inspection schemes. Ways, right? So whether it's local building code or state building code, there's some difficulties there. Whether it's the inspection process through the labor and industries, that kind of limits the quickness of how they can get product out, how these end product out the door. So there's some work to do on what looks like a new offsite scheme, right? This is not new. This is kind of a rediscovery of something that we've already done, but this is how we get to the scale that we need to get to. We could do all the subsidy in the world. We can just get all the regulation out of the way. And if we are still in 20 years building stick frame on site, we will never, I repeat, never hit the goals of the homes we need. The number will not exist that we need without doing offsite, without creating an innovative sector and investment in offsite production. It's also has massive multiplier benefits, right? We're looking at economic development benefits. These are hyper-local advanced manufacturing facilities in communities. We do not need one giant one in the middle of the state to serve the whole state. You can put these in regions, you can put them hyper-local into cities, provide really good environmental benefits. It's technology forward, as we talked about. It's going to be using AI processes to streamline and to quicken things up. And it's workforce ready for a younger workforce that is looking for opportunities, but has kind of a new bent, a technological bent that youth are engaged with, right? And so this is going to cut a cost. This is going to cut the cost curve, right? We need more supply, but more supply doesn't mean anything if we don't cut costs on the front end. And this is probably the most impactful thing we can do to do that.
Amen to all of that. I'm a big fan of modular as well. And there are many other reasons in addition to what Nicholas mentioned as reasons why modular is a good idea. The way I've been doing housing for the last 30+ years of my career has been through the use of the low-income housing tax credit and tax-exempt bonds. The tax credit is, in the US at least, the driver of affordable housing finance. It has created 3.2 million units over the last 25 years when the credit's been in existence, or 30 years since existence. It regularly cranks out thousands of units of affordable housing in the state every year. Those come to my client, the housing agency that actually allocates credits on a project by project basis. So every developer will apply for an allocation of credits. And depending on the points and how they score and where the project's located and whether they're funded, that project will come to fruition. It may take a couple of years to bring it forward with all of the various funding sources that go into it. Sometimes 5, 6, 7 different funding sources. They're very complicated transactions. They're very expensive transactions, and they're based upon where the developer can get land. I would like to flip that on its head. And I'm talking about this ad nauseum for years, actually ran with a group of other co-conspirators a bill to do this in the Washington State Legislature 4 times. And every time we got a little closer, we haven't quite made it yet. But that would be land banking at scale, creating an entity to actually buy up land in areas where we want it. And in our state, at least, Sound Transit is creating these rapid corridors with centralized stations that if we were able to buy the land around those stations and have a public entity actually buy, own, hold that land through multiple development cycles, realize the appreciation of that land value, sell it to market rate developers for an appreciated value, and either donate it or sell it at below cost for affordable, and also do all the pre-permitting, zoning, and decision-making of where different types of projects need to go in that area, we could actually move the needle at scale. 65 new stations coming online for Sound Transit in the next 20 years. If we can get ahead of that curve, get a hold of that land, plan for the type of housing we want, and not just one type of 60% AMI housing, but homeless housing, workforce housing, actually for sale housing, condos, you name it. If we can get all of those in one area, we could actually move the needle. There are a host of reasons why this has not worked. Many of it, we'll get to it later on, is the overlapping jurisdictions. People don't want to let go of control. But that's what we need to do. We need to actually flip it on its head and decide where we want to put housing and where we want to put resources, rather than have developers have to come to us and ask for it.
Yes, yes, and yes. I think I'm trying to think of anything to add. I think the thing I would add is that as an entity that came in with private capital and looking for ways to lend that capital in ways that would increase efficiency, close gaps, some of these kind of innovative ideas that Faith just talked about, had those been available, I think could have made the investments that we as a company, we invested $725 million in investment capital in this region. I think it would have given another venue or another avenue for private capital to come in and be useful. So I would double down on that one. I think the one other thing I would say on the module topic, you may have touched on it, but I do think that the opportunity for the workforce development component of that is a very important thing. And I think something that we as a state could also do that also leads to great jobs and so forth, is investing in the kind of labor and skills that are going to be required to do this kind of modular housing development, and even on the AI side, applying some of those AI technologies to the housing environment, I think is newer, I should say. And I think that's going to be an area that we need to develop.
It strikes me that one of the challenges we're going to have with, you heard it here today, manufactured homes, modular homes, offsite homes, plant-built homes. We haven't branded this very well. We don't know what to call this. I've had the great privilege to visit one of those plants. And for those of you who are not aware of this, 2 things I want you to remember about what Nick's been talking about. Number 1, when these plant-built homes, off-site built homes, or whatever the heck term we ultimately end up landing on to brand this, when they are assembled on site, I mean this literally, they are indistinguishable from on-site built homes. My mom and dad both died in a manufactured home. That was their last residence many years ago. Not our parents' manufactured homes. You cannot tell the difference between a plant-built home and an on-site built home today. Number two, the plant I visited, they build 3-bedroom homes in 12 days at 25% less cost than on-site. So time and efficiencies. So a couple of 3 times, private-public partnerships have been mentioned. I would like to gauge from you how important each of you thinks that might be in the effort to increase supply, especially without creating more sprawl. If so, what that needs to look like, how necessary is that? How important is that? And Amy, I want to jump back to you because I think you've got something to say on this, and I think the rest of you will too, including those who spent $750 million on.
For a couple of minutes, but I always have something to say, that's for sure. The one thing I wanted to just mention about the failure of modular as a volumetric piece is a bit challenging. So I think we are looking at flat pack, like IKEA, just think IKEA. And I think the fun way to put this is offsite. So, and the thing that we need to encourage when we talk about private public is manufacturers have failed. We've seen so many close offsite manufacturers because they take on the full beast. They take on the wall panels, they take on the kitchens, they take on the mechanical systems, and they try to produce, and a lot unsuccessfully because of the costs associated with that type of manufacturing. And why they fail is they don't have a secured pipeline. The pipeline does this because interest rates do this. And you imagine single family homes up in BC, not the flavor of the day. We're looking at multiplexes. We've done some rezoning of all our single family lots to allow for multiplex, whether 4 or 6. So we're looking at how to construct bigger things. And the only way to kind of do that in a volumetric way would be, your Lego bits. So when you think about offsite manufacturing, think of Meccano. We all used to play with it as a kid for your mechanical systems, and Lego for your blocks or your panel systems. So the term that I love to say, and I can't take credit for it, is that construction is dead and it's about assembly of parts. And if you're familiar with like Alibaba, you can go buy a bunch of stuff and get all the parts, online to assemble your home. Like that's the kind of shift that we need to make in our thinking, and no more, to lean into Nick, it's not the bespoke builds anymore of stick frame. So it's encouraging through policy with our private partners. We hear all the time developers are like the cost of delivery. We've just had some layoffs in the construction sector back in BC because they can't afford to build. They build a 1-bedroom, it's over $1 million, no one's buying them. They're not selling the stock that they currently have, and you're like, well, this is a housing crisis, but it's a cost of build crisis. So breaking it down and saying, okay, how can we construct? How can we navigate, and it is that repeatable IKEA model of why you can buy a desk for $5, is because they make 100 million of them all at once, and they've, made them assured. And then you have to diversify that supply chain. It's not one provider. If one provider is great at making mechanical walls, they make mechanical walls, another provider. And it's the same thing with material, not just, mass timber. I love it, but I don't think in isolation it's the solution. You have to think, okay, we need cold form steel, we need mass timber, we need concrete, we need to think about all of that and give up this bespoke or one solution sort of idea. So that didn't all answer your question, but I sat here just thinking how I wanted to say all that. So I will pass it. Nick can keep us on point, and I'll just talk about whatever I want to talk about.
All right, so I will note, and going back, you mentioned, what are limiting our ability to produce or to support offsite manufacturers. And she mentioned pipeline. That's another thing, financing and pipeline, which also dovetails nicely into a public-private partnership, because if we want to entice and produce investment in offsite to build lower cost housing that is still quality and looks great and can be indistinguishable from the housing we currently build. They need a partnership with the state to ensure there's a pipeline there for them to have, the assurance that they can continue to build and do that work. So that's one example. The other one is just something very concrete. Yes, obviously we need public-private partnerships. The public cannot do this alone. We'll maybe get into that later, but there's just way too much money that we need to do it. Public housing authorities. I'm from a public housing authority. That's one of my backgrounds in housing is working for Tacoma Housing Authority. We have done recent years in 2023 and then this past year in 2025 modified some of the statutes around how public housing authorities are chartered to ensure that there is an opportunity for them to use bonds and then also be able to do their own public-private partnerships with private developers. It's a little wonky. There's some specific detail on how to get there, but the idea is that public developers like housing authorities are social housers by statute. They have certain provisions they have to meet from a portfolio standard on how many units they serve low income and how many units they're allowed to serve basically workforce or market rate users. And they can issue bonds. And so if they're issuing bonds for particular projects, they're also allowed to sublend that money to developers, right? As long as the developers work within some parameter of the housing authority. So a great public-private partnership opportunity is to use housing authorities as those social housers with private developers who can build cheaper and then provide the public benefit on the back end through right of first refusal or long-term affordability provisions as housing authority as owner of the land with some tax abatements that are positive for the developer. So there's a lot of opportunity to work through some of these problems and come up with public-private partnerships that can really work in this space, especially as we're cutting the things like offsite manufacturing. There's also a lot in land infrastructure. We'll get into that later too.
Well, I was actually
Public-private.
I was going to echo what Nick said because the housing authority model that he just talked about is something that I'm working on right now. And this is an area where I actually am quite excited about. It's a turnkey model. I've always viewed this intractable problem as something that we need everyone to pitch in on. So we can't rely only on the nonprofits or on the public sector. We need for-profits to engage as well. But everyone needs to do what they're good at best. And the for-profits are really, really good at building and delivering, right? They know they can do it at scale, they can do it quickly, they can do it in, very, very efficiently. So how do we leverage that with the long-term asset being held by a public entity for the public good? And the way that we've managed to do this a lot, and I'm working on the third of these turnkey models right now. The first one was very successful. It was with the Snohomish County Housing Authority. We had a vertically integrated private developer who partnered in a partnership with the housing authority. They went and got tax credits. The housing authority issued bonds. The two entities were co-general partners and they brought a tax credit investor. The private developer demolished the old building. It was land that had been owned by the housing authority who contributed that to the partnership in exchange for a purchase price. So the housing authority walked away with some money. The developer builds the project, guarantees everything. They're on the hook. If the project goes, if there's cost overruns, it's the developer that pays them. They deliver the finished project, fully leased up, back to the housing authority, who got a developer fee for being part of the partnership, took that developer fee plus the purchase price and bought out the private entity. So at the end of the day, the housing authority owns this gorgeous new property, leased up with almost no money out of pocket. It was perfect. We've done another one since that's in process and we're in the third one right now. So that's where we need to figure out the best role for people and have them drive that role. For-profits, we have to say, are great at building. They're maybe not so good at operating long-term for the really deeply affordable. They don't have the social services arm that many of the nonprofits and publics have. So if we can get people to work where they're best suited and match them up, I think that's where we can start to see some progress.
And it was likely built for much less than the housing authority could have built it for.
So Jane, I want to pivot on this point. All three people seem to indicate that private-public partnerships are important. Nick specifically alluded to the magnitude of this problem is such that public investment for affordable housing isn't ever going to be able to cover even a fraction of the need. And so unfortunately, one of the things that has been my experience in dealing in the housing policy space for over a decade is that there is a group of people that really believe private developers equal bad. And my question to you, because that's a fact, I encounter that, it's a reality. My question to you is, how the heck do we overcome that, given that the obvious math suggests we have to scale up to build the kinds of housing for which there is a need? How do we overcome that, Jane?
Well, tell them to knock it off. You're high up in there, aren't you? No, and also, no, you are absolutely right. It's one of the things that we found in this work. When we first started working this, we got sort of a charge. You go learn as much as you possibly can. And, typical Microsoft time, which is like 3 months. Thank God for faith. And all the smart people in this community that are working on it. But that is one of the things that was really surprising to us, is the siloed approach to just housing all up, and sort of the lack of thinking about it as a continuum, and the lack of collaboration and creativity and curiosity that was happening between the private developer side, the nonprofit developer side, et cetera, et cetera. And in some ways, I feel like it's not sexy. It's not super exciting, but the notion of convening and with a sort of a neutral body, which we felt we were the neutral body in these meetings, but convening people around a table that might not have really talked that much, or if they did, they were so guarded. And I think we came to a lot of the same conclusions, and frankly, even connected some private developers with some nonprofit developers that are actually doing projects today, which is great. And I just think that is, there's a saying we used to have, I don't know why I bring this up, but there's a used to have, like, in education, when you're working with schools and teachers and principals on driving change. And in the philanthropic community, we sometimes say, don't underestimate the value of the muffins and the coffee, of like bringing people together, having them sit around the table, a little food, a little coffee, and lock them in there until they come out with some good ideas and some areas to work together. In some ways, that's what we did. And I think this notion of a neutral party coming in with new assets, real assets, and saying, these are available, but these are the kinds of conditions that we want to see. And in some ways that worked. And I do think that's, and I look at Amazon, who is doing a lot of just incredible work as well. They came in and they've doubled down. They've done some really great things too. And I think the more we can get that kind of commitment, the more of that kind of innovation and piloting and practicing we can do.
Amy, you look eager. Amy.
Yeah, I want to challenge I don't know who's in this room. Are there any developers in the room? Oh, got one. See, I'm about to defend you, because they're not big and they're not. I love what you're saying about bringing people together. Digital, so is a nonprofit, so I get to be the neutral body. I'm funded by the provincial government, and the sector are my playmates. So we get to have these honest conversations and the value of the coffee and the muffin and help support. My thing with the poor developers are their margins are so small, and there's maybe 5 of them. Once again, remember, I'm in BC. There's maybe 5 to 10 of them that are big boys, that are big folks, right? That can handle taking on and leveraging themselves. Otherwise, in BC, there's 24,000 small developers, construction folks building homes. And so they have 8 to 10 employees. They're going job to job, pipeline's an issue. They don't have the margins. And then we're going to talk about policy, which I can't wait to talk about. I used to build social housing for the city of Vancouver, so I know what it is to try to expedite and build with nothing and figure out how to make a project financially viable. And you sit there and their margins are so small, and then you go, oh, well, the sustainability requirements, the there's 650 land use documents in the city of Vancouver, and they have conflicting policies and they have conflicting requirements, and balconies, no balconies, environmental, cost. I want this made out of brick because the thing next to it's made out of brick. And you're like, it's social housing. I can't afford brick. So it's really difficult to get balance. And yeah, sure, the bigger developers have, cookie cutters that they make, and they know the costs down to a nail, and they won't enter into a deal without making the money that they want to make off the deal. But when you have a sector right now that's not able to actually build, and they are shutting down and firing, letting people go because they can't afford to meet their payroll, those developers are in a pinch right now. And they're not as big as bad.
So Amy, maybe it's not the circumstance in British Columbia, but in Washington State, what I'm suggesting is there are a lot of policymakers who just believe that the profit motive in the production of housing supply is an inherently bad thing, notwithstanding the fact that meeting the need is self-evidently going to require lots of private sector involvement. Do you not have that phenomenon in BC? And if you don't, please export it to the state.
No, I think traditionally what you're describing exists. I think, people are like, yeah, they are charging too much for these units. And I don't generally touch affordability as a subject because frankly, if we innovate and they save a week on every floor that they're creating because of a new technology they're implementing, that's not trickling down to the cost of the unit. Really, we're only going to get there if we flood the market with supply. Are we going to affect affordability, right? So yes, there's certainly need, but they can't finance projects. They can't get their foot out the door. They've got pre-sale condos that are only selling 25% because the cost of those condos are too high, because the cost of building those condos are too high, because they're over, quote unquote, bear with me when I say over-engineered. Everything needs to be safe. But I had a planner say if we stopped caring about as much, we could build faster. So the policy levers that go into, you have a community plan. Why are we taking 3 years to rezone something? I can give you the answer. It's because of development contributions. The municipalities and the local governments are looking for their fees. And so we've just had a new policy in BC where those fees now can be collected later. So you don't have a developer that needs to pay these fees out of the gate before they've sold any condos. So that kind of can leverage it. The other, because we're going to talk about policy at some point, the other piece is going, okay, well, what value is it taking 3 years for community engagement? And then the community says no at the end of 3 years. Like, who's been involved in a project like that? I have, multiple. So there's this balancing act. And I think traditionally, yes, the bad, evil developers got their name for a reason. But I think we're in this perfect storm of it's not one thing. I think it's, a combination.
Faith?
So it's a complicated answer. I mean, there are developers out there who are terrific and who do it well, who we should be encouraging to do more. There are those out there who are very small, can barely make it work. And I have my doubts about that because they'll probably need a bailout at some point. But there are also developers out, and how many people here are government, right? Okay, so for you, and I have a lot of government clients, and the developers I worry about the most are the ones who are taking advantage of an emergency, who are here and see a lot of money in this system, who want to get as much of that as they can for themselves. I am one of the biggest champions of for-profit developers. Let me make that absolutely clear. I think we cannot solve this problem without them, but there is a very small subset of them out there that are working around the country, and they're coming to Washington State. I've talked to many of them on the phone who want to move in and rely on the governments to get them funding to do this work. Here are the things to watch for. And this is what I tell my clients. Watch for a deal that is too complicated to understand. That sounds crazy, but there are. Watch for a deal that it sounds too good to be true. Watch for a deal where the developer has no commitment to long-term affordability in the form of a written, recorded covenant. And finally, make sure you watch for a deal where you're not giving undue government support. If they're asking for everything from subsidies, right and left, property tax exemption, and permit relief, and all kinds of things, guarantees, that's too much. The developer must have skin in the game. They need to take some risk as a developer for them to be really doing their job. So if they can pass that test, that's great, use them, but do watch for those things.
Nick?
So back to your original query, which is, the magnitude of the investment required demands and that we use the private market, right? There's no other way. We're talking about trillions with a T of needed investment to get to the homes we need. It's undoable from the public sphere. So we need to, there's a way to reduce those costs and to incentivize and to ensure that private developers have access to the opportunity without giving over the bank of publicly subsidized financing, right? We need to cut through smart regulatory barriers. We have regulated ourselves into a box that we cannot get out of. And a lot of it is parochial needs of cities or parochial, expectations of cities that we'll talk a little bit more about that down the line here, but we need smart regulatory reform that can basically provide that cost incentive to a developer without forking over public dollars necessarily. Obviously, the new technologies we've talked about, AI specifically, can really lend access to a streamlined and more affordable process. Obviously, the partnerships we just talked about. So all of this leads up to the fact that we need the private market in this, and we need to find a way to both incentivize them, but also work in the public good through means other than direct subsidy. But as the Lieutenant Governor mentioned, there is an ideological view here. And what it is, let's be clear, this is a view of fighting capitalism and using housing as the infantry, right? That is what this is. This is not trying to solve a housing problem. We're trying to solve a housing problem. They're trying to solve a capitalist problem. And so we need to figure out a way to solve the housing problem within the context of the world that we actually live in, right? And so that's how I view this. Now, jurisdictions have done, in some cases and in a lot of cases, a really piss poor job of managing and penalizing bad actors, right? Whether it's slumlords or developers who are doing some of the things that Faith is talking about. There's also a responsibility on the public side to enact sound penalties and to ensure that there's accountability for bad actors that we have not seen, which leads to an oversized view of what developers are or have been. And we need to solve that by actually holding those accountable who need to be held accountable, which we haven't done broadly in a very long time.
Wow. I'm going with wow. Okay, so we've established that we need the private sectors as well as the public sector. I think you'd all agree that we need all levels of government, local, state, and the federal government somehow involved in being a constructive party to or partner to housing production. But I want to ask you if there are particular policy levers that you think are especially being underutilized when it comes to creating housing and maybe especially affordable housing. What is it that we're not doing way below the potential? Nick is eager to answer this question. And if he's anywhere near as provocative as he was on the last answer.
Maybe we'll see. I have actually, me and Faith have talked about this at length, that I think we need to employ better financing strategies through the state or through policy, way to utilize maybe the state's funding power to create tools where need exists to help modify current programs that are getting part of the way there but should get further, to cover either market failures or to cover the state's investment or the state's, the state's interest in solving this problem. I'm going to echo what Faith said before is land. We do not have a state land strategy. We need to create a land banking system that prevents speculation on acquisitions and the cost increases that come from that and solve for the infrastructure that's necessary to build the housing we need, right? So land may be one of the certain pieces that state policy can address, a strategy that basically acknowledges that it is the foundational piece of building housing. And as we gain the technology to streamline the production of housing at the foundational level, the land strategy will support that. And then the infrastructure that comes from that is another investment the state could make to also reduce costs, but ensure that the housing is long-term feasible. The third thing that I'd say is we need to accelerate innovation and we need to not shy away from it, right? So I think the state has the capacity to take calculated risks in this space and should, right? We should be fostering creativity, focusing on resources that support competitions, proof of concepts, pilot program, and reinforce the outcomes that we need as an outcome, as a viable thing that we can see and touch and do and learn from and create policy from, not endless studies that provide concepts, but don't ever get to the thing that we actually need, right? So I think we should move forward with outcomes first, pilots, proof of concept, and then work backwards and works into stable long-term policy based on something that we've seen actually there. It's done, it's already done, we did it, right? So.
Amy.
Yeah, I'm gonna grab that because that was well said. Thank you for framing that. So we've got a system that has been quite successful. So we have challenges and we put forward a challenge to the private sector. So it's this great private motivated, wants to get part of it. We get sponsorships and we do things around like, and they change policy is my point. We always required 2 staircases, and that's design prohibitive and cost prohibitive in some cases. So we did a challenge, and we had the sector come together and submit designs that would solve for that problem, and it pivoted and it changed policy. Going from single family home lots, you know, there are 33 by 110 lots, and everyone's like, well, you can't have more than one house, maybe a duplex. What else can you put on there? We did a challenge. It got opened up to the sector. We have 4-story, 6-story, or 4-plex, 6-plex gentle density homes now. Bill 44 was passed because of that challenge. It armed the politicians and it armed the policymakers in order to go, oh, okay, we can see how the sector is behind this and we can see the solutions. So that's a great way of influencing policy because you can't just sell density. Like everyone at the city would just go, oh, we'll give you a density bonus so you can build something bigger so it'll be more affordable. And you can only do that for so long. And to talk about technology and land use, you know, there's LiDAR mapping of the areas. We know where infrastructure is. You do a heat map in your jurisdiction or your region of where existing infrastructure is. You think, bam, well, that's obviously where, you know, you want to build. I had a group of University of British Columbia master's students at my disposal for 8 weeks, and we did a data project. And those students like pulled the data and showed me where and what lots we could build, you know, a modular based product. And I now know in 4 major cities exactly where you can go and put those lots outside of making obviously public land available for development. That's a big one that we've got going on up in Canada. But yeah.
Faith.
I actually, if you're asking for underutilized levers in the public sector, I think housing authorities in Washington State are an underutilized lever. I think that they are, well, Seattle just went through a big exercise to create a brand new entity for social housing, and we already had it. It just frustrated me how much time and effort and money will continue to go into standing up a social housing entity when we have them all over the state of Washington, and they are very effective when properly utilized. King County Housing Authority, Seattle Housing Authority, Vancouver Housing Authority, Snohomish County Housing, they're out there, they have huge portfolios, they have experience, they know what they're doing. It is mixed income housing and publicly owned long-term in perpetuity. We already have them. So we need to throw more resources at them and get them to actually start firing on all cylinders.
Jane.
Yeah, I think a couple of things. One is building up on existing infrastructure is kind of one of the things that I was thinking. That's a great example. The Washington State Housing Finance Commission is another great example, is continuing to invest to make these entities that are strong even stronger instead of recreating new ones. I think that I 100% agree with on the social housing piece in Seattle. Just resources spent in the wrong direction. I also agree that the state as the leader, I think, is also a very important thing. And that's been great to see in the last 5 years. I mean, the state of Washington has really taken on this issue. What?
I'm smiling.
Oh, good. Really taken on this issue.
Sorry.
Become a great leader and advocate and convener of these things, and working collaboratively with the cities, which I think is really outstanding. A lot of the low-hanging fruit on the policy work in the cities and the regions, there's still a lot to be done, but a lot has been done. And I think to get to the scale we need to get to, we need bigger swings at some of these big policy pushes at the state level. I just remember talking to some of the developers that we were working with to bring them come to the east side. That was actually a focus for Microsoft. Just to backtrack a sec, is that one of the things we saw is that there was a lot of activity in Seattle, and very little happening in Bellevue, Redmond, Kirkland, et cetera. And they didn't have the infrastructure. They'd maybe have one part-time person that was sort of their housing person. And the idea of going, city by city by city and trying to understand the unique policy environments of a place that, developers looking at a piece of land that was like straddling both places, it's like, oh my goodness, how do you make these policy environments work when, gosh, is it really that big of a difference? Don't answer that, but there probably is a difference between Redmond and Bellevue, but from a grand scale of things, there isn't. And so having that state come in and pull those big levers, I think is great. And I think it's also when it will help bring in other parts of the private sector, I believe, when there is a scale motion in place. I think it becomes much easier for other entities to come in and participate. So
I'm going to ask one more question before we get to those submitted. Last Sunday was my book club. We read Abundance. For those of you who are familiar with, they posit that we no longer have the capacity to produce either housing or energy generation in the amounts we need. And I've been working in this field of housing for a long time, and I constantly characterize it as a crisis. And one of my colleagues said, "You're wrong." And I said, "What do you mean I'm wrong?" I gave him the data on how much of people's income they spend, which obviously reduces standards of living. I gave him the research on how lack of housing is really the primary driver of homelessness. I gave him the data on how the racial wealth gap is actually the housing gap. I won't get into that now, but it is. And he said, "No, here's the deal. With energy," which Mr. Klein and Thompson also argued, there's an action forcing event when you flip the switch and the lights go on. That will spike voter sentiment, create a shift in the authorizing environment for elected officials to take the actions they need to change the status quo. And we should all remember what Albert Einstein said: the two most powerful forces on the face of the earth are compound interest and the status quo. But it will happen. When we can't heat our home in the winter, we're going to pick up our phone while the battery is still has a charge and tell our legislators at the local and the state, maybe the federal level, fix this damn thing. There's no action forcing event for housing. It just keeps getting worse. It's like the frog that slowly boils to death on the oven. And I left kind of pessimistic. And so I'm going to ask each of you who work in this and have for a long time, and bless you for that, what gives you optimism? Jane Broom.
Come back to me. Ah.
Who wants to go first? Oh, nobody. Amy, thank
Hello.
you.
Because I work with the robots. So that's what I'm going to tell you guys about because it's a piece. I mean, I think we need to, from the policy lens, from all of those things, we need to look at and understand that we don't work in silos. And I find the appetite for working together has exploded across the country. Unfortunately, 30 years ago, the federal government in Canada stopped building housing, and now they're out to play. You've heard Mark Carney on the news, our new prime minister, talk about putting $20 million into industrialized housing production. So I'm kind of excited because for me, that means more robots. And I just want to paint a picture of what's possible, if I can take 2 minutes to do that. So when you think about the use of technology, we're looking at regulatory ready designs. I know people like to call them pre-approved designs. I'm not a fan because nothing's approved in the regulatory environment. So let's talk about a bunch of beautiful designs that are in a catalog, and they have been designed with BIM. BIM is Building Information Modeling or Management, depending on which way you look at it. It's a digital file for this beautiful design of a home, and it can be followed through the whole ecosystem of this home, through all the people that touch it. And that's very important to note. There are so many actors in the housing production and if you're, at the beginning end and you're the policy folks, never forget that, your local governments touch that thing until it's completed, and then when it's end of life. So understanding the role that your whole entity plays in local government against the end-to-end housing production. So not a plug to my work, but there is an end-to-end housing production life cycle. So we did a user experience of what it is to be a home and how you're built, and where local governments impact that. And it's throughout the whole thing. So noting that, we can build something, design something with a electronic footprint and manage it throughout. E-permitting is there. It exists. And supporting local governments to decide there is not one silver bullet, and anybody can reach out to me and ask me, Amy, what do you think of this product? I will probably know, but not one product is going to solve your problem for permitting. So keeping that in mind, there's definitely lots of options, but permitting, compliance, generative design, all of those things, submitting electronic files. Architects design in 2 or 3D and then flatten those files and give you guys PDFs. So we're missing steps here. So understanding leaning into supporting those offsite manufacturers and helping that sector, whether it's through financial, means of, I have a $6 million fund that I have co-invested, and that fund is now $15 million worth of investment in local governments in BC, or local businesses in BC. So we are stimulating the economy with new tech. So that investment was a really brave move by our housing minister in BC, but it is seeing benefits tenfold. It's all repeatable technologies that are going to be able to, as my new buddy here, Nick, said, that proof of concept, my buddies, DM you on Facebook or whatever. I'm not even on Facebook. I don't know what I'm talking about. So looking at that prefab, offsite manufacturing is key. How we build these homes, what requirements we want, we need to monitor those, because all of these requirements that our policy and our, folks want, it to be this level of housing. We don't actually know if that mechanical system is driving the outcomes that we wanted 20 years down the line, if those systems are actually effective, but they're costing a lot of money to implement. So using technology and AI to monitor for that. End of life is the other part of this, where we need to look at how we reuse our homes. So when we build them, when we design them, we're building them so they can be repurposed in a way, and looking at materials that way and how we can scale. So those are all very big, optimistic things. As I said, I've seen robotics dig holes. How we support, I have a project that's Inspector AI. So we all know we've got a retiring workforce, and we're losing the intellectual knowledge of all of those key building inspectors. So we've got someone out there right now, a company, and they are going out and using language models to hear, you know, when they go on site, oh, that footing should always be deeper when it's this, so that we're getting that. And it should be able to support the youngins that are coming up, and they get to use a digital tool, which would make it a cooler job. Anyway, those things are all super cool. Happy to always connect and talk about all the cool technology bits and unpack how AI, everyone knows this, it's just math on steroids. So it's not solving all our problems. You don't need an AI bot or an AI widget to solve your problem. You probably need a service design discussion, and an AI opponent can be part of it. But I'm like always slow your roll on the use of AI and understanding what it means, but happy to talk about where it's really being impactful. That's optimism, Amy out.
I got mine. I remembered. Okay, so I am ready. I'm ready.
She's optimistic.
I'm very optimistic. I forgot for a sec why I was, but now I remembered. This sounds really, really corny. I'm sorry, but it just go with me. It's the young people that actually bring me optimism. There's a whole generation of young people that are so passionate about the issues in that book, which I have not read, but I'm going to. I know I'm scared to read it actually, but on the energy side and the housing side, these are issues that in many ways, at least for me, I didn't grow up knowing that these were huge issues. The kids, the young people today and the students who are studying public policy, politics, sociology, all these different building, all of these different fields are studying this stuff. And the innovation is there, and the ideas are going to come. That's how this country is. We solve hard problems by investing in our own people. And that's what makes me optimistic.
Nicholas.
So I'm really happy you brought up abundance specifically because
Brought a copy.
well, I have the copy with me consistently because I've read it twice. The recent and changing narrative around the politics, right, of producing outcomes is what makes me optimistic. Like this book and what led to it, right? I was a fan of Ezra Klein before this. I was a fan of the Niskanen Center before this. But there's been real promise in reframing, specifically around democratic politics, but generally, what it means to produce for a populace that you are representing. And I am really optimistic that there's finally a language or a narrative or a framework that says, hey, we actually need to do things again to make this problem go away. And I think just the fact that there is a narrative around that is really optimistic to me. And I don't think I was being super provocative earlier because the fight against abundance is like literally an interdemocratic fight, right? And that's because of the idea around working within the capitalist framework to do something versus arguing against capitalism, whether or not it produces what you want it to produce, right? So I think the vision of a nation that builds and innovates, that embraces creativity and pushes the boundaries of what's possible is very encouraging and very optimistic. And I think this book put a language to it, which is why I'm a kind of a Derek and Ezra stan, right? Like I really think this is an important conversation, and I intend to produce that framework in my policies if I can.
That's great. You know, it's important for me to get out of the trenches every now and then and leave my desk and get with people who care about housing, and being in a room like this brings me optimism, right? Because there are people out there that care. It gets to be a slog after so many years of doing it and feeling like it's an intractable problem that you're not actually moving the needle. So I was with Jane earlier. I was in a funk when I was asked to speak on this. I thought, is there anything I could say that would actually be positive at this moment in time? Let me tell you one. This last year, a year ago, almost exactly, the State Housing Finance Commission here in Washington rolled out a program that was given to them 2 years ago by the state legislature called the Covenant Homeownership Act. And this is the first time that we have ever done a race-based down payment assistance program in Washington State. That means that, yes, we are making decisions about who qualifies based on their race. And people that qualify come from one of about 7 different ethnic groups, racial groups in the state, had to have resided in Washington State before the enactment of the Fair Housing Act and have been discriminated against in housing, or had their parents or grandparents been discriminated in purchasing homes. So far, 500 people have made it through the process and have gotten up to $150,000 to buy a home in Washington State. That is fantastic news. And that kind of thing is going to move the needle.
So moderator's prerogative. Lied earlier. I actually am optimistic. I was trying to be provocative. I was nowhere near as good at it as Nick was. But I'm optimistic because what I've seen happen with the housing policy debate writ large over the last nearly 15 years that I've been involved in it, and especially in the legislature, in the Washington State Legislature in 2023, it was uniformly characterized as the year of housing. And then this year, it was uniformly characterized as the year of housing 2.0. Did we do everything we needed to do? No. But it's a top tier issue. It is a top of mind issue. I'm optimistic because when I meet with my counterparts from BC, they tell me all sorts of things they're doing that we're not doing, that are making a difference. They give us ideas and just as importantly, give us inspiration. We're about out of time. I hope that the questions you submitted were at least in part covered by the conversation, but I want to give each panelist a last opportunity to say anything they think that didn't get said that should be, or reiterate a point that you think is especially important. So Amy, start with you and come this way if we may, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to, I guess, say thank you for obviously having BC as a partner in our corridor here and inviting us down. We do learn from each other constantly, and I think there's great space for shared learnings. I really believe that, you know, we can all run out and do a bunch of POCs on our own, but the power of sharing the information from our individual things, you know, is what I recommend everyone do. Continue those conversations, and yeah, I don't want the conversation to end, so please reach out. Let me know what interests you, what you want to talk about, where your pain points are, because I always look at pain points as opportunities, because I work with the robots. Anyway, thank you so much.
Thank you, Amy. Nick.
So I guess what I'd say is that I am open to ideas. I've been kind of traversing anybody who will have me or will listen to me or will offer to brainstorm with me since session ended and even before that. I intend to come up with a strategy that addresses the remaining needs in our housing kind of ecosystem. And I'm coming up with narrative to kind of communicate what that means and what that should be. And that none of this has been approved by the governor, by the way, so I'm just kind of riffing it. But what I need to do is continue to learn, right? And I think that the strength of what a state policy advisor like myself should be leaning into is hearing from anybody and anybody who has an idea, who's willing to sit at a table and run it down and you know, vet it and make sure that if it works as a policy, if it works as an amendment to a policy, and we can get the right group of people together to agree and push something forward that makes sense, that moves the needle, that provides an outcome for the people that we serve, then I want to be a part of it. I want to listen to somebody. I want to make sure that we're in that room together. This is not something you can do by yourself. And this is, you know, this is, again, a top tier issue that if we don't solve this, there are cascading consequences for a long time, for my kid and for your kids. And so I guess I just say that one, thank you for even showing up and listening. But two, my email is very easy. It's nicholas.carr@gov.wa.gov, and I'm on the website. So email me if you have an idea, you want to meet, you want to talk. I will talk to anybody in any region, in any field. I'm happy to do so. I really think that this is a problem best solved collectively. So, and it, you know, it doesn't matter your political persuasion. I'm happy to take ideas that are more conservative if that's your bent, because I think there's a need for all perspectives. So.
And Faith, who gave it the least urgent number when characterizing the problem?
I did.
You said 8 or 9.
No, 8 or 9.
I
At 8.
I apologize,
8 or
Faith.
9.
I apologize, Jane.
I actually want to say that one thing that was not, I think, as clearly said as it should have been said in this panel is how lucky we are in this area of the country. We have governments that care, starting at the state all the way down. And I have to say this number of cities that have established housing trust funds in the last couple of years is skyrocketing in the state. It's fantastic. People are leaning in. And I want to give really big kudos to Microsoft. I think that you guys were out there long before other companies were out there, leaning in a big way that set a standard and an example for other ones. And as a result, Amazon has stepped up the table, and in the Bay Area and other areas, other companies have as well. So we can't do it alone. It has to be a public-private partnership.
Thank you. It's nice. I guess for the, raise your hand again if you're the lawmakers of some policymakers. I guess the thing that I would always look for unintended consequences. I know you do that, but in some of these policies, sometimes there are things that seem like this is really going to help people, but I think it's that constant balance of trying to help people immediately and trying to solve the long-term problem. And I appreciate that that's the work that you all have to do every single day and make those trade-offs. But in housing in particular, it's really important that we put the balance both on the people and the long-term problem and really address some of those underlying issues that we've all talked about today. I think that's the only way we're going to get through it. And I too I'm optimistic about our state. I always have been. I'm a lifelong Washingtonian. And I know we can do this like we do so many other great things, and we'll do it right. We'll do it with people at the center, but solve things for the long term. And thank you all for your leadership. We're really lucky to have policy folks like the people like Faith, people like the amazing work that you're doing up in BC and the leadership. So thank you to everybody.
So my concluding comment would be for all of us to please be mindful for those of us who enjoy housing stability, security. My guess is most of the people, if not all of the people in this room, either own their own home or in a stable housing environment. If you are, I think, and I include myself in this, it's easy to miss the magnitude of this problem and the cost to us all, even if our world does not seem to be directly affected by it. The cost of the serious, severe housing shortage is borne throughout society, which underscores the need for policymakers to, I think, step up. And with that, I'm going to ask you to wait 1 second. Please express your appreciation to Jane Brew and Faith Pettis and Nicholas Carr and Amy Villas, and exceed the decibel level of the gratitude applause we heard next door. Now, please.